That's so cool. Well, today we are going to have our last session for the 18 months of launch. There's still 6 more months of training happening in coaching, so I'm glad you all were super excited about this being the last session, because it's not the end of the journey. We're going to talk about one of my favorite topics, something that I'm really passionate about, and I think that God has gifted me to walk in, and that is discipleship through relationship. We'll talk a little bit about that. In your notes, it says discipleship or life in 3 spaces, which is what I've always called this talk, and I changed it because I do things like that just to mess with my friend Matt, and I'm sorry, but it's not a big deal. But I think you'll understand as we're talking why I made that change, what that's about. But first, I need to give you an update from Philadelphia. So a year ago, my lovely wife stood in front of you and shared a testimony of how God's been working in her life and getting involved with neighbors. And she led you in the Eagles fight song because we were the Super Bowl champions. And when I spoke, I know, here we go. I'm taking my lumps. I'm trying to show character here, so stop. That's all I got. I also remember saying something like, people are telling us to act like you've been there before, and we have no idea how to because we've never been there before. So I want to give you an update. We didn't win the Super Bowl. I know. We didn't win the Super Bowl. Yet something incredible is happening in our city. And if you have eyes to see, you'll be able to read the signs. You see, we had the same thing happen. The narrative looked a lot similar towards the end of the season when Carson Wentz went down yet again. And Nick Foles came to the stage and led us to the playoffs from something that we really had no business or deserve to be there. But this is actual street art in my city. They are calling for Nick Foles to not only become a saint, but he might be the Messiah, to lead us to the promised land, to overthrow the evil empire. Yet it didn't happen, and we're looking for a new Messiah. And the city is calling for us to unite around another team, another Savior who will disappoint us. And now Nick Foles has become an unrestricted free agent. He is not the king we hoped for or longed for. He'll be gone. And who will we turn to? Well, just this week, Bryce Harper is signed for $330 million. And he'll be another false messiah for my city. Who will be making more per at-bat than the median income of anyone in Philadelphia. It's crazy, isn't it? The police officers, the school teachers are really excited, and the pastors. So that's our update from Philadelphia. Here's the thing. We are always looking for hope. And we'll put it in anything that shows any measure of value in being worth hoping in, whether it's an athlete or a sports team. And people aren't really interested, as Matt said earlier, in spiritual things. So proclaiming that there's hope in Jesus to the masses in some ad campaign or something, it doesn't land on people because it's not applicable to their lives. They don't trust another false savior. But people they do trust and listen to people that they have a relationship with, whom they've built trust with. And this is now just your answer to that. So we talk about discipleship happening in spaces. There's a few questions we should probably address if you're paying attention and you're still awake right now and you're not thinking about Nick Foles. You should ask the question, what do I mean by space? What is a space? And I define it this way. A space is a time and place where relationship can happen. Well, if I'm using the word relationship in defining space, why do I talk about it as a relational space? And here's my point. Because no matter what I do today, you're going to be just like me when you hear this, and you're going to think of events. You're going to take these spaces and you're going to think, okay, what do I do in those spaces? I do this event or that event. And I'll share stories of things that have happened in the relationships that God has given me. And you might say, well, that's what you do in those spaces. And I want to overemphasize, over-communicate that these spaces are about relationship. So I can't tell you what that's going to look like for you. But the church maybe has lost its way in the West when it comes to relationships. So I'm going to overemphasize it. And I'll tell you why I say that, and we'll have a couple of questions to consider about that. I've had no less than one conversation every 2 weeks with someone who's part of a church or who's left a church and says, you know, I get a lot out of the church that I was at or that I'm at. I get a lot of good teaching. But you know what? If I have a problem, I don't know who to talk to. What do you mean you don't know who to talk to? Well, I don't have any relationships with people that I trust within the church. Now, I'm not going to take this small sampling of people, though it is getting larger as the calendar moves on. I'm not going to take that small sampling and say that's what happens in every church. But I am going to take note of it and say, if there are enough people asking, where do I have relationship? To me, that's upside down. As I look at the life of Jesus, he didn't start some institution. He started a movement through relationships. He called people to follow him, and they built relationships. And then out of that, they had a greater community, a family that was on mission, as Matt was sharing with us earlier, these missional communities, and that was called the church. Everyone knew who their people were. And I wonder, are we doing it backwards? Have we missed it? At the very least, can we ask the question, are we still concerned about relationships? Or are we concerned about something else? Are we pursuing success, notice it's in quotes, success at the cost of relationship? I don't know if I've said this to you before, but something that was really impressed on me as I joined in this endeavor of church planting with the Metro District was I see that in most, I'm not saying the church is a business, but most businesses, the greater their growth, up and to the right, that's success. But my experience in the church is the greater the growth, oftentimes the loss of relationship. And the church might be the only entity that sets out to have its success become its demise. Yeah, let that sit for a second. The church might be the only entity that seeks success at its own demise. And I'm not against growth. I'm saying without relationship, you lose that. And your success is just everyone's alone together. Yeah. So if we lose relationship in the church, what happens to discipleship? And that is not a rhetorical question. If we lose relationship in the church, what happens to discipleship? Any thoughts?
It becomes impersonal.
Say that again?
It becomes impersonal.
Impersonal. Yeah, back there.
It doesn't happen.
It doesn't happen. Any other thoughts?
Stars.
Stars.
We make stars.
We make stars. Like celebrities? Yeah. Any pushback? Good, let's move on. Okay, that's great. Quick reminder. Discipleship happens in relationship. In fact, I would say that discipleship begins at the point of relationship beginning. Just who and to whom and to what are you discipling people? To yourself, to Jesus, to something else, but all relationships involve a form of discipleship. Now, these are going to be some obvious statements, but we have to start with the obvious together because I've told you every time I've been up here, I'm a very simple guy, and I don't want to neglect some of these obvious statements. Relationships take time. it may come as a shock to you, but you can ask my wife, she's here today. On our first date, I didn't ask her to marry me. I thought about it. And I'm an Enneagram 7, I'm an apostolic evangelist, I'm a pretty forward-thinking guy, let's get this thing done. I was like, let's just go ahead and do it. But I was like, it's probably gonna take a little bit of time. How long? It took a little bit of time. Because just as I was ready to pursue that, she actually dumped me. But that's a different story for another time. I love to tell you half the story, so I get the sympathy, but that's not the whole story. I'll confess that. Relationships, shocker, involve people. More than one. That's a relationship, which is awesome. Relationships in our head are fantastic, or they're terrifying. I don't know, depending on how you're processing that and where your heart is and what you're thinking and your brain chemistry. All of these things are factors, but relationships involve people. And people are messy. I know that because I'm a people. And I'm a mess. and you are too. So welcome to the group of misfits. People, though, are never projects. People are never projects because they're still people. Right? That's why we use the word people to define people. We don't say that they're projects. They aren't. They're not your means to get ahead, to prove your worth. They're not a tool that helps you show that you know what you're doing, or any other way that you could step on them inadvertently or consciously. That is not what people are for. The gospel is really good news, which may seem out of place in this bullet point list, but that's what God was telling me as I was preparing this and saying that, I'm not here to beat you up. I'm here to remind you of the slowness of relationship, of the deep meaningfulness of relationship, and it would be ridiculous to not say that the gospel is really good news. As messy as people are, the gospel is bigger. As deep as the pain of relationships can go, the gospel goes deeper still. And the joys and pleasures that we experience in relationship are brought to those heights even more through the good news of new creation in Jesus. So if discipleship is going to require relationships, I would encourage you to start valuing relationships. Amen? So here's the question, and it's a long one. There we go. Who will love others enough to slow down with them and follow the Spirit's leading in discipling them in relationship? I'm asking us all that. Who among us here is willing to demonstrate love, to embody love in the everyday with people, following the Spirit outside the gate to demonstrate God's love through discipling relationships? I'm getting some squeaking here. It's pretty awesome. You can tell I'm pacing. Sorry, that was just for me. And now you. So we have this tool. It's really simple. It's 3 circles. And each circle represents a relational space. And I'm going to walk you through how I view and give you some examples of how I've experienced each of those spaces, or how I'm experiencing them right now. And hopefully these tools will help you to this tool will help you to understand that you too have different relationships. And they might be helped by seeing how you can approach each of them intentionally. You following with me? Yeah. Okay, good. So the first one is called first space. Isn't that great? It's fantastic. The first one is first space. A first space relationship. And we call this the go space, or the as you're going. And the reason we say as you're going is because that is a better translation of Matthew 28, verse 19. It's as you are going, make disciples. Or actually, as you're going, disciple people. Because you don't make a disciple. The Spirit of God does that. So here's some things to think about within this space. It's regular life with intentionality. Where are the regular places that you go in your life as you're going that you might find people there? And maybe it's helpful to think of this as you have networks of relationships and the norms of relationships. So a network is a group of people that you might seek out because of common interest, common interest, hobbies, or there's something that brings you together. Maybe it's even your workplace, which could be a network or a norm, depending on if you telecommute or do any of that stuff as well. A norm is something that you do regularly. You have a school that your kids go to, and you drop them off and pick them up. It's a norm. Your place of work, if you go to the same office every day. I'll talk about that in a second. Are you following me with this idea of networks and norms? This isn't just a strategy. There's actually people there in your networks and your norms of relationship, and you can engage with these people. And here's some ideas on how to engage with people. Slow down. I do this thing, it just gives me a little bit of joy that walking around Philadelphia and you see someone and they say, "How are you doing?" as they're walking by, I stop. "Well, let me tell you how I'm doing." And they're back and they're walking. I guess you didn't really mean that, and I feel really justified in my sarcasm. But I realize that if I'm going to keep that practice up, you have to be really consistent. You can be really consistent because people don't really care. Or maybe they care, but they don't expect an answer. But at the very least, people aren't slowing down or stopping to hear the answer in most cases. So here's what I've learned to do. God said, "Why don't you just stop?" Now, not awkwardly, right in front of them or something. "Hey, how you doing?" That's weird. I fit a profile, so I don't want to do that, just the way I look. But if you ask someone something and they do respond, maybe you could just stop and show interest. I'm going to tell you, I've said this to you before, I'll say it again because I think it is worth repeating. In a day where everything comes at us really quickly through social media, technology, and all of these things, the bar is really low for friendship and relationship. Presence is huge. So when I say slow down, I mean be present. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. The Message version says that Jesus took on flesh and moved into the neighborhood. And he was with us. And we, by that same power, get to be with people, be present and listen to them. Here's another thing that I'm learning about first space relationships or building new relationships. As you're going, go in humility and weakness, trusting the Spirit. I left my phone over there, so I don't have my Bible with me. So that was a joke for you guys. But I know that in Luke 10, Jesus sends out the 72. And he tells them, when you go, don't take your money bag, your coat, don't take your cell phones, your wallet. Don't take all the things that help you feel like you've arrived in this world. Don't take all the things that give you comfort and security, but go as sheep among wolves. Thanks, that's the mission. Thanks, Jesus. Sounds awesome. Can I put on a pair of pants, please? That'd be awesome. Go and bring peace to people. And if they receive your peace in return, you're there. Trust God to provide through people, even for you to eat. Yet, we often go as the heroes. We go because with even sometimes the best of intentions, we feel like God has called us to be a light in a city or a neighborhood, and yet we forget that it's his mission, and we go in our strength because we have a message to proclaim. And the message, I believe, is one of our weakness and our need and his provision, our longing and his hope. And it wasn't that Jesus did this and now continue that by showing that you're really powerful. Demonstrate God's power by being powerful. He says demonstrate his power in your weakness. So if you enter into these places not as the hero of the story, but as a one who wants to be present and listen and be available for people, I think you're going to start to find a lot of relationships. So let me tell you a little bit about some of the networks that I've been involved in. And I've shared some of these with you before, but I brought pictures this time because I really want you to see what life is like here. That is the corner of, well, it says Morris, so I know that. Morris and Point Breeze. It's that picture right there is the recovery house. Some people, men and women now, that I run with on Wednesday mornings. At 5:30, I'm at that corner. And that, if you look coming back towards us, where you would be sitting is one of the least safe areas of the city. It's also in the most, it's the highest rate of gentrifying neighborhood at the same time. There's a lot of gun violence right there and drugs and all of those things. And we meet right there and we run together. Every week. I've been doing it for a couple of years. And we run the streets of Philadelphia before most people get awake or wake up. And as a result of that, I want to tell you a little bit about this organization back on my feet that we do this with. This is a mural. Murals are huge in our city. They're everywhere. I showed you a couple earlier. And this is actually inside the back on my feet offices. We huddle up right at that corner and we pray together before. It's just part of the routine that they do in this organization. And I've been able to do that with lots of people over the last couple of years. That is a network that I joined in to build relationships. I'm going to show you a little bit more about what God has done with that and what he's doing with it so you can see in pictures. But that was a conscious choice that I made because I don't naturally wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning to put on sneakers and go to this corner and run. There's a lot of things about this story that would be different if God hadn't told me to go do this. Like the sun would be up when I'm getting shoes on. That would be the first thing, right? You follow what I'm saying? And maybe he's calling you or has or is telling you now, like, there's a place that you can go and build relationships. There's a network that you can jump into. And how about some norms? So here's some normal things that happen in my life. Coffee is a huge part of my life. And so is my wife. Her thumb is up there. So we regularly get coffee. One of the many fine coffee establishments in our city. We have 4 kids. I said it again correctly. Just remember, 4 kids. If you remember from last time. 4 kids, and we have parks all over because we don't have a backyard. We live in a city. There's no backyard. And there's no grass, which means I don't have to mow anything, which means I save about 2.5 hours every week for mission. So if you really are struggling with being busy, move to a city. You'll gain some time, okay? Here's another norm. We go to the barber shop. That's my youngest. He's not upset about the clippers. He's not being hurt. He's bummed that he has to leave the emo group that he started with his friends because I'm shaving off his hair. So there's more story to my barber. I told you some about it last time we were here 6 months ago, and I want to share some more about what God's been doing there. But these are normal things that I'm just going to do. I'm going to take my kids to the park. I'm going to get my hair cut. I'm going to get my beard worked on, because this just doesn't happen naturally, folks. I just want you to know. It looks crazy. It looked like Santa Claus if I didn't have a barber. It just goes out like this, so got to know that. Drinking coffee, being in the neighborhood, those are normal things for me. And you have your norms. You have things that you do regularly. I don't know what they are, but there's probably people there. And I'm not saying this to try and be demeaning. I'm not at all. I'm trying to emphasize relationship. Because I think so often for me, as I was starting to think about what it looks like to build relationships and to disciple people, I kept thinking that I had to do something big to draw a crowd and attention, and then I could share good news. And then I actually read the Bible, and I saw that Jesus just did it in the everyday. Any questions, thoughts about First Space? I want to make sure that this becomes simple for you. Have I told you that I have a friend who said, Gino, when you ask a question, count to 10 before you start talking again? Yeah. I got to 7 right there. I'm growing. I'm growing. All right, let's talk about second space relationships. Second space, we call this the connect space. So there is in some ways a movement as you're building relationship, just like there is with any relationship. You meet someone in a coffee shop because they work there, they become an acquaintance, you get to know them, and maybe you find out something that's going on in their life, and you say, hey, can we grab a meal together so I can hear more of your story, and maybe a way to serve you in that. Maybe that's not that abnormal for us, right? Or there's millions of ways this could play out. But as a relationship is moving into greater intimacy, if you will, and I don't mean that in a sexual way, I just mean in a heart-to-heart relationship, we're humans way, we know more of their story, and we get to share some of our story. We're connecting with them. So that's exactly what I say and how I think about it. I'm connecting with their story because I'm learning it. And as I'm building trust with them, they're probably asking me about my story. And you know what's really cool about my story? There's only one thing that's cool about my story. It's part of God's story. So when I share my story, I get to share about God. And I have friends that are following Jesus, and that's encouraging for them, and that's helpful, and I'm building relationship with them. I have friends that are not following Jesus, and that's the only time they hear about Jesus is through what he's done in my life, or what he's doing, or my struggles, or the victories that he's bringing in different areas of my life. But here's another way that connection can take place, and that is connect these friends with your other friends. Now, I use that language intentionally. I just want to point it out. I didn't say you connect your unbelieving friends with your believing friends. Well, there's a distinct difference between them in many ways. Isn't it normal to just get friends together if you love people? Wouldn't you just look for ways to connect them because they might have shared interests? I have some friends that I'm coaching. They're all church leaders. I'm coaching. And one of the guys, he's had a hard time. He's very analytical, and I've been working with this team for a little while, and he's like, I just got to see it before I can understand it. And I'm like, man, I want to just shake him. What do you mean? What do you have to see? Like, don't you have friends, man? Don't you ever invite anyone over? And he's like, yeah, but I just don't get it. And I'm like, do you live in silos? Like, you have friends over here, and then they never know anything? Like, what is that? And he just had a birthday about 3 weeks ago. And he called me up after it. He goes, I get it. I had a birthday party. My wife threw a party for me, and we invited our neighbors and our friends from church and our other friends from the things that he does with training for a triathlon and all this. And he goes, and I sat back and I just went, wow, they're all here. And it's because I know them. I was like, man, the kingdom is for children like us, brother. That's so good. Second space relationships. I don't know how we lost that. I must have hit something. I apologize. Connecting these friends with the other friends. And here's something that's uncomfortable, so I'm going to say it. Because I like tension. I've told you that before. Not the like anger, hostility tension. I like tension, and here's why I've learned to like tension. Because tension is when two opposing things are working against each other. And you're not giving way to either. You're just in that tension of discovery, of understanding, of growth. If you're doing weight training, tension is the way that you actually get stronger. And so often in relationships, I'll speak for me, but I bet you're kind of like me. I want to resolve tension. Someone has a concern or a question, and they're like, hey, what do you think about this? What should I do? And I've got an answer, because I've got a great plan for your life. Yeah. Except I'm not Jesus. I'm his representative and his ambassador, and I do hear from the Spirit, and I'm not saying that you can't speak truth to people, but I'm saying, could we pause long enough to allow them to have tension to come to an answer where the Spirit is speaking to them directly? So I'm not big on resolving tension all the time in these relationships. I'll give you an example of something that happens a lot, is people will start connecting relationally with other people, and they'll come and say, this is amazing, you have a lot of different friends. How is that? I'll ask, well, why do you think that is? And they usually don't say because I'm great and I'm really outgoing or anything like that, which is a little disappointing to my ego. But what they usually say is, I don't know, I don't understand. There's something about this group of people that it's like they're family, but none of you look alike and you're all from different places. And we're like, yeah, so that's what God does. They'll say something like that. It must be something to do with your faith. Yeah, they came to that conclusion. And because we allow tension. Now, there's other ways that can happen. And second space relationships happen in a lot of different ways. I can't tell you what to do to create second space relationships, but I can tell you there's lots of things you could be doing in a second space relationship. In fact, if I could tell you what to do, I wouldn't, because I think I'm mature enough to know better. I hope I'm mature enough to know better. So let's talk about connecting. Let's talk about some ways that God's done this. So this is a cool story. This is a guy that I run with, I've been running with for a while, and he had a birthday party a couple years ago, and he invited my family to his birthday party. I run with him. He's a really good runner. I am not a really good runner. I'm an okay runner. I just don't die, so I think I'm a sufficient runner. That's really all. That's my goal. Don't die today. And Andy's a really good runner. And he said, well, you guys are like family. And there's a reason why, because we've connected in other ways. But this is super meaningful to me. His mom came in from out of state, and we got to meet his family and his friends. And it's like my kids, us, we're the only people from the running group, I think, that showed up, or that he maybe invited. I don't know. But Andy's a really cool guy, and he's finding his way in this world. And just recently, on a run about 3 weeks ago, he said to me, Gino, I'm dating someone that you know. I'm like, okay, my daughter's not old enough, so that better not be the answer. I didn't think that. And he told me the name of this person. It's someone that I helped start in a missional community about 9 years ago out of the city, and she lives in the city, and she's a friend from a totally different world. Like, it's just not even the same. I didn't connect them. And I thought of this as like God's connecting people that we know. I mean, there's almost 1.6 million people. How did they find each other? Well, internet dating, that does a lot of the work, right? But I think that's so cool that they're together, that I know these people that I never would have put together. But we've connected with his friends, we've connected deeper with him, and now he's connecting with someone that I know who's a believer and is probably leading him in very significant ways. Pretty exciting. So it's just some of the people that I run with, some races. I'm the guy with the beard. Yeah. And one of the things that we've done to connect with this team is, this is a picture of one of the first brunches that we had. I shared that with you, so I won't tell the story again. But you can't see it, the lighting's bad, and my picture isn't really good. But on the left side on the counter, there's a little sign that's like one of those chalkboard signs, and it says something like, from Acts 2, about they gathered in homes and broke bread and ate together. And we have a friend who works for the organization, and she was at that brunch, and she was one of the first people to join our community, our missional community. And she said, I was at that brunch and I saw that sign, and I thought, you guys are people that I want to learn to do life with. And thought, that was a pretty cool sign. I'm glad someone gave it to us. I had forgotten that it was there. But we gather the people together, we open our home, and we just say, hey, let's find out what it looks like to live like family together and not just get to know each other through running. There's some other ways that we connect. We have a space. It's a corner It's a corner like retail space that we use for our church gatherings once a month, and now we're doing it a little more often. I have a friend that I've connected with over the last 7 years. He's not a believer, but he's an artist, and I told him that I love some of his art. I think it's great. I believe that God created people that are creative, and your creativity is an expression of that, whether you believe that or not. And he's like, I'm not even sure if I believe that, but that's really cool. And he said, would you ever let me use the space for anything? And I said, of course. I'd love to like honor you and show value to you, and let's do an art show in our space. And he's like, you'd do that? I said, of course, man. I trust you. I love you. So he organized 13 local artists, and they did a gallery in our space. We just showed up and supplied some refreshments for them and got to meet about 50 or 60 people from the city that I had no idea existed, because I don't run in those relationships. But I connected deeper with my friend and got to meet some of his friends, and they started asking, like, what is this space? And we got to tell them about the space. But that wasn't the point. The point was just to get together with people. We do brunch church. This is a picture of the brunch church. We connect with people in our neighborhood. We have a meal together. We share the scriptures. We sing together. And we get all sorts of people that come together to encounter God and have a space where that can happen. Here's another picture of another one. Lots of kids in our brunch. One of the other things that I wanted to share with you, and I'd say that it's one of the things that I'm most enjoying in my life right now, outside of Jesus and my family, my church family. I consider my family when I say that. So my family is my barber. I told you 6 months ago that he shared his story with me a little bit and told me that he wanted, just as a refresher, I asked him how I could walk alongside him in his recovery, and he said, I'd like to learn the scriptures. I'm like, what? I didn't say that, but I definitely thought that. I was like, wow, 17th and Broad is Athens, and you want the unknown God that you're speaking of to be declared. Amen. And he said, yeah, I get together with a group of guys, and we want to see how the 12 steps relate to the Bible, and you're kind of like a pastor, right? Yep. I told you I fit a description. I'm kind of like a pastor. So I'll do that, and we'll go, and we've started gathering. So here's what I wanted to share with this, is that was 6 months ago, and it wasn't happening. It kept getting canceled for very good reasons, where someone in the rehab program would OD and go to the hospital. There were people die. It's terrible. But after about 4 months, I started questioning whether this was going to actually happen, because we kept canceling it. And then at about 5 months, this is hard to say, but at 5 months, I was really convicted that the only reason I wanted this to happen was so I could tell people a really good story about what I'm doing in the neighborhood. And I said, well, just shut it down. I'll go and get my hair cut, I'll be nice to the guy, but I'm never bringing it up again. I was very convicted. And that was about the time that God started working, because it wasn't me making this happen. And I was getting my hair cut, and he said, hey, I still want to do that thing with you. I'm sorry that it hasn't happened. Can we grab coffee on Tuesday and talk about it? So we did. And he's like, how about next Wednesday night? Okay, we'll do it. And Wednesday night comes, and he texts me. He says, it's probably just going to be me and my uncle. The other guys, I didn't get the sign up long enough or early enough, so there's not enough notice. It's just not going to happen. It's like, that's fine. I do not own this anymore. I'm just going to show up and unlock the door, and that's all. So I go over there a little bit early, not as early as I probably should have, and there's like 8 guys waiting out, chain smoking right in front of the building. I'm like, these are my guys. I know it. I know my guys. And we started our study together, and we've been meeting, except for one snow day, we've been meeting every week for like 6 weeks now. And these guys, how much time do I have? I don't know when I end. Oh, good? Okay, because this is exciting. These guys call this the church now. We call this a church gathering, and I'm like, you betcha, it is. Sound like I'm from Minnesota. You betcha, it is. It is a church gathering. Because we go through the apostles' teaching. We're sharing food together, because there's always food of some kind, whether it's just like donuts and coffee or something. But man, that's modern day communion, I think, right? Matt, can we do that? Yeah, coffee and donuts. We can bless that. And here's some of the things that's happening in this group. Like, not all of them are following Jesus, but they're being changed. So I want to tell you a story about how that's happened. And when I talk about don't resolve tension, what's happening in this. A couple weeks ago, are there kids here? Okay, but you guys know about clubs where people take their clothes off and people pay for that? Okay, good. All right, I can say that. All right, good. One of the guys, they started bringing up about how the thing that's changing them the most is that they're recognizing that they're not a failure, they're a child of God. Now they've failed, they've hurt people, they've done time, but that's not the truest thing about them. And I said, amen, that's true. So my story's the same thing. Different circumstances, same story. That's where we start every session. We're all in the same place. So we decided to just start looking at some scriptures about identity. And I walked them through the same passage that I walked you through 18 months ago, Matthew 28, verse 19. Talked about baptism being a transformation of identity. Baptized into the name of the Father that makes us what? And they said, brothers. What does it look like to live in that family? And they said, well, things would really change. And one guy, he says, all of these guys grew up in the church, in the Catholic Church, and they have a different view of God than what actually the Catholic Church would teach, I think, honestly. But one guy said, you know, I have a question. I've been seeing her for a long time, and now I'm in recovery, and now I'm kind of pursuing God, and I don't know what to do because she has no interest in that. So what do I do? And I didn't say anything. And he said, because I don't think that I should be going to strip clubs with her on Saturday and then coming and studying the Bible with you guys on Wednesday. And I didn't say anything. But my friend over on the other side, he said, maybe that's not a good idea for you anymore, bro. Maybe that's not what it looks like to be family. And I didn't say anything. And then another guy who's only been out once, and then this time he came out for the second time, he was really upset. I don't know what you guys are talking about. I don't understand why God is so judgmental. Where do you prove this? How do you know that God isn't okay with me just going to a strip club and blowing off some steam? It's okay. It's not a big deal. I go to the church and I just pray and God's fine with me. And I said, nothing. I'm learning. And one of the guys looks at him and says, listen, I come from the same place. I know exactly what you're saying, but I got to tell you that for me, the transformation is that if I'm a child of God, she's a child of God, and I sure am not looking at her like that. Yeah, wow. I was like, what just happened here? I'm going to write that down. That is dope. And then, I won't give you all the details, but then a couple other guys started sharing about the dignity of women and how it's defiled and corrupted through this. It was amazing. And he wasn't really satisfied or convinced. And he turned to me. I'm going to need to talk to you because I don't understand where you get off saying these things and how you can support this. So I said something because it was my turn. He directly asked me, and I just prayed, like, Lord, what do I say? I mean, I do know something that I wanted to say, and that is, listen, I'm glad you asked this question because as we're looking through the 12 steps, you definitely talk about, we get to an idea of a God of our own understanding. And my understanding of God is Jesus. I've been pretty upfront with you guys about that. That's what brought most of you here, is you want to know about Jesus from the Bible. So I say this to you in all care and concern. Like, my understanding of God is Jesus in his life and death and resurrection, and I can show that to you if you want, if you're interested in those sources. And your understanding might not be a God to your own understanding. It might be a God in your own image. Have you considered that? And he went from being angry to thinking. And he said, thanks for saying that. I never considered that. You've given me a lot to think about. And guess who didn't show up last Wednesday, by the way? You know, I mean, but he also, I shared that, and another guy who was his sponsor told me, well, I just said to him when he told me that he's only praying for things for himself, that I'll see him after his next detox. I'm like, whoa, well, I didn't say that. I mean, that's strong language, but that's how we talk to each other. What I'm saying is that God is working in people, he's building community, and we're just going to the places where he leads and drawing people in. Let's talk about third space. We call it pause, or I also like to think of it in terms of what happens there. We rest and we equip. It's a space where it's mainly going to be for, I'd say, those who are hungry to follow Jesus or those who are following Jesus. It's a different kind of relational space because there's a different kind of intimacy. When you're equipping and training and caring for one another, there's probably a common mission that's formed to equip people too. You get what I'm saying? You still with me? Thanks. I'd just call it your family. It's an easier way. I mean, there's definitely things about people that are true, but if you're going to label it, it's your family. This could be your missional community, or we call them house churches. Wow, that's what I just said. I'm right on my notes. And this can look like it could look like a time and a place where that happens. You could have scheduled things. We talked about that last time with Family on Mission. There's organized and there's organic. You can have a weekly meeting that you come together and you have a meal together and you share life, but it also happens in the everyday through things that are just going on in your life. But if there's a movement, so you're being refreshed and equipped, just like I said. But if there's a movement in these spaces, it might look like this. And that is that you're building relationships with people, and as they're connecting to your story and the people of God, maybe some of them are coming to be part of the family of God and then being sent back out to do the same. There's a rhythm to this. But I didn't show you the rhythm first because I don't want you to just take a tool and implement it. You know, a shovel is a really good tool for digging a ditch, but it's also a tool that can be used for murder if it's not have the right intentions. And I don't want you to hurt anyone. And I don't want to hurt anyone. And we're not just trying to get people accomplished and out on mission. It's in the ways of relationship that mission actually happens. And that's a totally different outcome and a different method and a different posture. And the hope is that we might be able to see multiplication that happens around relationship and new communities forming, new families forming in new relational spaces because you have new relationships. And other relationships supporting you in your mission and in God's calling for you and connecting with people in the in-between. I really like this picture. I can tell you why. It probably isn't that meaningful to you, but it is to me. That's looking out of a co-working space that I got to work at one day, and they had an hourglass right there. And I just thought the hourglass demonstrating time against like this creation that's so impressive in one of the taller buildings in our city and really nice. It's not just that your life is a vapor, I'm not going there, but that you could go there and that would be okay. But it's that these things took time to build. And relationships take time to build, and the tyranny of the clock marches on, and we try to keep pace with the clock rather than relationship. And I want to encourage you, what could this look like for you if you simply ignored the clock? Ignored the outcomes in the measurable and started thinking about the intangible relationship and the value of that. What might that look like for you? Who are the people in your spaces? Or, as Mr. Rogers would say, and I'm wearing a sweater in his honor, who are the people in your neighborhood? In your neighborhood. They're the people that you meet as you're walking down the street. They're the people that you meet each day. Let's pray.